All right. Good day, everyone. Welcome to the Orange Wheel podcast. This is the podcast where we support business leaders in navigating the monetary transition to Bitcoin. I'm joined here today with Anas. Anders, he's been an active and visible figure in the Bitcoin space since 2017. He's advised prominent Bitcoin companies, including Swan Bitcoin. And today he's also one of the most top performing popular investors on eToro, where his 100% Bitcoin HODL portfolio has attracted over 600,000 followers globally. He's also organized some of the largest Bitcoin-only events in North America, including those in Miami and I believe Nashville. He's also creator of the MSTR Mondays, where he does analysis of the strategy stocks, formerly known as MicroStrategy, and brings on relevant guests to understand the company's strategy and where the stock price is expected to be going. And that has since expanded more recently into covering some of the other major Bitcoin accumulation companies like Smarter Web, Metaplanet, and the Blockchain Group, which just recently rebranded to be called Capital B. And beyond that, he's also been an MC at major Bitcoin events. For example, Bitcoin Prague last month, where he introduced major celebrities in the space, including Michael Saylor. And he remains a well-liked and social voice in the Bitcoin community. So with all that, it's a long CV. Great to have you on the pod. Anders, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Ted. I'm really happy to be here with you. And, I met you at BTC Prague, and we have great conversations. And lately we've been hanging out in the weekend on a Bitcoin meetup. A couple of Bitcoin meetups I did there on the harbor front in the sun, enjoying.
Yeah, it's been fantastic to be in the same, city as you. I guess you spend your summers here in Copenhagen, but the rest of the year in LA, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. I like to be in Denmark in summer. I think there's as a Dane, I'm obviously biased. I think there's no better place to be than Denmark in summer when the weather is fine. The rest of the year, for reasons, I'm in Los Angeles.
So Anders, I'm kind of curious to open up, given that you've been speaking with a lot of the CEOs of major Bitcoin accumulation companies, and maybe we'll start there actually. Kind of double pronged question. Firstly, is there a common thread that you see, a common personality trait you've come to see amongst the CEOs of these types of companies? And then the other side of the question is the terminology. I know you and I had this discussion where you'd like to kind of introduce calling these Bitcoin accumulation companies rather than Bitcoin treasury companies. Maybe spend a little bit of time explaining the rationale for that change of terminology.
Yeah, sure. And I'm not. Let's take the latter one first, because now that's top of mind. I'm not sure if people in general or the industry has decided on Bitcoin accumulating companies. I think it was Corey, CEO and founder of Swan, that said, I ran a poll and also suggested let's go with BACS because a couple of reasons. First and foremost, if you just hold Bitcoin on the balance sheet, but you're not really actively engaging financial tools to maximize the growth of that Bitcoin, then your Bitcoin treasury company, but those are not the ones I focus. I think the maximum value creation within Bitcoin, the maximum value creation as well within TradFi is this one area of Bitcoin accumulating companies that aggressively use tools to grow the Bitcoin per share, the Bitcoin on their balance sheet, like Strategy, Metaplanet, Blockchain Group, SWC, H100, and 50 Sequence and 100 other companies. Those are the ones I'm interested in. I see that's where the most value growth is, and I just find it fascinating. To get back to your first question, if I see a common trait, I guess I can't say that I know these people, the CEOs or the directors so much personally yet, but I think what they all have in common is they're incredibly hardworking and professional and overall friendly and rather engaged with the community. And I think all of that is necessary to pull a successful back strategy off. Another reason why I think Corey leaned towards back, not only does it fit better, but also it's not a tip with the hat to Adam Back, the only person mentioned in the white paper, and also extremely engaged in that industry and invested heavily.
I was actually thinking that to myself when you were using the term back, where I was thinking, is there a link to Adam Back on this one? So I'm glad that actually the years I was going to quiz you on that. No, but I think it's really important that we, because this is kind of a new space, new strategies are emerging, things that haven't been done before are being done before. I think it's really great that we take the time to really come up with the right terms to distinguish between different companies, because it's really frustrating for, I think, people like yourself and I who are maybe deeper into this space. And we start watching the mainstream media, they're kind of lumping all these things together, right? They're saying, oh, there's 300 companies that popped up doing the same strategy. It's like, no, there were like 100 there before that just had Bitcoin on the balance sheet, but weren't doing the strategy playbook. And it creates a lot of risk of misinformation out there for the less informed audiences, I think. So I think it's good that you're thinking about these things.
Yeah, exactly. Like Tesla and Digital Marathon Holding, the mining company. They have Bitcoin, but they're not aggressively pursuing maximizing that as their core business.
Yeah, totally. So I think then maybe going a bit deeper into the analysis that you've been doing, could you maybe share with the audience like some of your, and I know it's a fairly complex subject matter when it comes to like valuing these types of companies, understanding which ones are going to be the relative winners versus the others. But maybe in broad strokes, if you can maybe share like 2 or 3 insights that you've made since you've kind of embarked on this journey of research analysis, interviewing the company leaders. Where are you at when you're thinking right now, and what are some insights you can share?
Yeah, I think so I knocked out 12 live shows the 2 weeks before I went on 2 weeks kind of holiday mode with family. And a lot of that really is to develop and fine tune my own understanding and investing in the space. And what I personally find most useful is quarter to date Bitcoin yield. And if you look at months or days to cover, it's very closely related naturally. But I look at that because I don't care how much yield you created since you bought your first one Bitcoin, a long time ago. Of course, that's going to be a phenomenal yield. But what can you do for me today as an investor? How much yield are you generating? How much Bitcoin are you stacking extra, and how fast on the stocks I own? Or maybe I don't own, but I look at the company. So that's one. And the other one is the MNAV. What is the multiple that I'm paying for the MNAV for the Bitcoin on the balance sheet? But this is very dynamic. I develop my own thinking. There's disagreements and agreements across people looking at this. There's a lot of us on X, focused on this. But you want to I don't want to overpay for the MNAV if the BTC yield is too slow. But also a high MNAV gives a better yield, or it should do. If you can sell stock with more premium, you can grow BTC yield faster. But that's why the quarter to date BTC yield is so important to me, because how much are you actually yielding? Because I first and foremost want to see, a high growth in the Bitcoin per stock. That's what we're here for.
I get it. So I think that kind of makes sense in the sense of kind of looking at, okay, how much are you paying on the MNAV basis versus the current stack? How fast is that stack growing? Do you also have some indications for each company on kind of what their like capacity is? Like where do you think they can kind of get to? Are you kind of doing some estimates on that basis as well?
Yeah, and actually, I'm gonna soon start. Like I've done a bunch of different shows and focuses within this back space. Soon, I will release and start a new show, which kind of I think will be the most important for my channel and for myself, because that will be trying to generate the overall sort of. This is the overall understanding, and this is comparing the different backs to each other that I find interesting. And so it's very simplified when I say I look at the MNAV and the quarter to date BTC yield. There's a bunch of other things that also play in. Local jurisdictional tax advantages, for instance, are there ETFs? Metaplanet looking great on all of those things, but definitely also I do look at, well, how big is the company now in terms of the market cap? How many Bitcoin they have, and where I believe that the local system, the local market, the local nation can sustain them. So, to take an example, I would happily go on record saying that I expect a Metaplanet to grow into 500,000-600,000 Bitcoin, WC maybe, 105, and so on. So I do also look at what's the nation they're in and what are their advantages. So when I look at that, and that's what I will be introducing in that, is really looking at these companies that, well, right now, I always look at the market cap measured in Bitcoin, right? So Metaplanet market cap is less than 50,000 Bitcoin now, but I do expect them to accumulate 500,000. So that's X denominated in Bitcoin. I don't care about, dollars yes, they will all go up in fiat terms, of course, in dollar terms or whatever local currency, but I'm interested in how much Bitcoin denominated can you give me as growth? Is it worth the risk? How much can the stock fall if there's a bear market? And that's one thing. I actually spoke to Adam backstage at BTC Prague on Industry Day after I had introduced him on stage, and they came down. They had an amazing fireside panel, and I asked him some questions, and one of the things he said is, be aware of MNAV compression for some of these high flying, fast growing companies if there's a bear market. And we don't know yet if 2026 will be the 4-year cycle confirmation and compression, maybe not, right? But that's something to be aware of. So look at all those things. How much is the growth potential from here? And what are the risks, and what is so the answer is yes, I guess.
Yeah, no, but I look forward to seeing some of that more in-depth analysis. And because it is, I totally understand that it's a fairly complicated and new frontier, and it's not easy to kind of articulate everything in a short interview, right? So I look forward to seeing the kind of more in-depth analysis on your own channel in that regard. So I think maybe a question, I think something you pulled up there got me thinking, which is what you're looking for, as you mentioned, is Bitcoin per share and growth in that, right? And yeah, I think what I sort of see as this mega trend is that investors like yourself, but increasingly more retail investors, many of whom are on X and YouTube, but also some savvy institutional investors, they're moving into the future of money as well. And they're starting to think under a Bitcoin standard where their opportunity cost is Bitcoin, right? So like, I think you, like I, we have a large stack of our own wealth in Bitcoin. And then the question I think many, Bitcoiners might say is, why would I invest in a company? I'd rather just hold Bitcoin, right? And it's kind of a new way of thinking for, I think, many, like, let's say, conservative Bitcoin maxis, where they're like, can a company really do better than just holding Bitcoin? So I've started to come around to that. I think it's taken me some time of education to understand how a company can accumulate more Bitcoin per share for its equity holders, having attended a lot of, watching a lot of Michael Saylor, having attended Strategy Day, watching your podcast. But that's also what's kind of inspired me to start Orange Wheel as well, in helping companies kind of move into the future and say, if this is what investors are starting to look for, what can you do with your business as well to be able to deliver on what investors of the future are going to be looking for? So I know it's a lot to talk, like a lot there, but basically, I think the first part of the question might be, okay, any thoughts on people, Bitcoiners who haven't yet made that kind of understanding, that leap to say, okay, some companies can actually generate Bitcoin per share growth greater than your own opportunity cost of capital than just investing in Bitcoin itself. And then I think I'll start there, and then maybe let's go into where we see the space kind of evolving to in the future. We'll come back to that.
Yeah. So, I consider myself a Bitcoin maxi, but also I'm an investor by heart. I just find it fascinating. Like, to me, it's just like fun and a hobby. And, I bought my first stock when I was 12 years old at a time where there was no prices on stocks on the internet. I would get the newspaper the next day. There's one price, the closing price, and I would have such a piece of paper, right? And then in a pencil, I would chart the price day by day by myself at the age of 12. So once I discovered Bitcoin and got into Bitcoin and started using that as my saving technology, I realized, well, I can't invest in stocks anymore because everything goes down measured in Bitcoin. Deflation already started in 2009. If you use Bitcoin as your denominator, houses get cheaper, stocks are crashing, everything is crashing denominated in Bitcoin. So I could only invest or save in Bitcoin, right? I don't own real estate. So that was my communication, like many, all other maxis, right? That was the only thing I had was Bitcoin. But then particularly last year, then Strategy, Michael Saylor really made it obvious that you can actually outperform Bitcoin, and for good reasons and very logical. And to me, like sound, ethical, like this is all good. I consider Strategy like companies that backs as good for Bitcoin, good for humanity. And some maxis think it's bad, but to me, it seems a little bit like, well, then you haven't looked into it yet, or maybe you're upset because you missed the boat or something like that, right? So, but you buy Strategy at the price that you deserve. But last year, Strategy, Bitcoin, I think, performed 2.5x, and Strategy performed 6.5x. It's like that ballpark. I don't know if it was from the 1st of January to the 1st, or the 15th to the 15th of January that I looked at it, but significant outperformance. The reason I got into I recommend a strategy actually to people that, either very young people in family, or older people, where I thought, getting them on cold storage and seed phrase and all those security concerns, etc., backup was not the ideal solution. Back in 2021, I said, buy strategy, back then MicroStrategy, in your portfolio. Let me help you do that. It's easy, and it works. Really, just to have a Bitcoin ETF with a positive compound interest instead of a negative compound interest. Anyone understanding compound interest understands not to underestimate yearly changes, if they're positive or negative. Like, that's really, really important. And strategies seem to be able to, every now and again, they did something, a convertible bond or something, that would be a little bit more Bitcoin per share. Last year, it really took off. So for that reason, because of like security and age, etc., for some family members, I just thought and think that owning strategy stock made more sense for safety reasons than a seed phrase and a cold storage and all of that. And then I just looked at it as strategy it's like a Bitcoin ETF with a positive compound interest instead of an ETF with a negative compound interest. And anyone understanding the power of compound interest know it's really important that it's positive instead of negative. Like, it means so much when every year you keep going in that direction, right? They'll be like, and then for my own journey, I saw what was happening, and the outperformance started to be hard to ignore. And then I was looking at Bitcoin's graph and price on TradingView, and I saw a news about MSTU, which is a 2x leverage exposure to MSTR stock. And I would not recommend anyone else to go out and buy that. It's high octane, and you kind of got to know what you're doing, which I didn't when I started. I learned a lot since then. But I took the decision that I'm happy to put a little bit of money into this during what I consider the last year of the bull run, of Bitcoin bull run, because MSTR generally outperforms Bitcoin. It's leveraged. And so that was my reasoning for, okay, end of September last year, I bought, a little bit of MSTU and a little bit of MSTR stock. The purpose is to accumulate more MSTR stock. So that was my own venture into it. And then as of the 2nd of May this year, 25, due to all the research from Climb That Ladder, who I have on one of my shows called Meta Planet Roundtable on YouTube, I bought my first Meta Planet stock 2nd of May. And since then, also got some SWC, which I've doubled down on a few times, and a tiny bag of H100, which is in Sweden.
Mm-hmm. Okay, super cool. And then I'll just preface this by saying, obviously, nothing that Anders or myself says is financial advice. It's just for educational purposes and our own opinions. But with that preface, I mean, do you have any sort of guidance when people are thinking, okay, maybe they're just starting out as investors, how much allocation to Bitcoin accumulation companies versus Bitcoin itself for a person who's maybe not falling into those categories where security and education are maybe an issue, people who are midlife?
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of rough guidance for these types of folks?
Yeah, thank you very much for that, Ted, because now you're reminding me of something I wanted to say early on, because there were, as part of your question. So while before I only had Bitcoin as an asset and didn't hold any stocks because Bitcoin outperforms everything else, at least in medium term and longer term, then because I noticed that MSTR is outperforming Bitcoin, then I started getting some of that, just a little bit. And the way I really look at it is, your first priority should be to have Bitcoin in cold storage, if that's something you can, handle and educate yourself on and be secure about. And so Bitcoin in cold storage really is money, right? It's the best money the world has ever seen. In fact, it's so near perfect that it's unlikely to be replaced. That's a dangerous thing to say, but at least for the foreseeable millennia, probably. And so you want to have money, I think, in general, right? Rainy day and all of that, just life savings. But I think there's nothing wrong with also investing to generate a yield on your money. And I did not invest for years and years because nothing could outperform Bitcoin. Companies that can keep putting more Bitcoin behind each share do outperform Bitcoin. Strategy has, the others are as well to a large extent. But the percentage between them is such an individual situation, like a decision. So it's hard to say. I would say if you don't need your funds the next 3 years, like at least 3-year investment horizon, then I think you'll be better off in companies like Strategy and MetaPlanet and some of the other backs than holding it just in money. But if you need the money next year, 26, where we might, if the 4-year halving cycle of Bitcoin price-wise, that cycle, if that continues, then you don't want to buy the backs because they might have a collapse in the MNAV and you could lose half your shirt. And for that reason, so it's to do with that. But so for instance, there's a young family member in my extended family, and she doesn't need the money the next 3 years. And there's some stocks that are limited at what you can buy in Denmark. I'm not sure she can get access to MetaPlanet, but for her specifically, I'm recommending to buy Strategy and MetaPlanet, which might be able to get hold of through either Nordnet or Saxo Bank. So if it's a 3+ year time period, I believe she'll be better off with that. But this is not financial advice. It could go wrong. I've made mistakes in the past, so
totally get
it. This is not financial advice, and people need to do their own research, and you're responsible for your own investments.
Yeah, totally. And with that, I mean, continuing on this again, not financial advice, anything I'm going to say, but I sort of see the way the world is maybe moving to is that Bitcoin is becoming the new bonds. It's becoming the new kind of risk-free asset, which I think is hilariously ironic, right? Because 10 years ago, people would be like, Bitcoin's the most speculative, risky thing you could ever invest in. But really, I think the way it's going to be in the future, and we're increasingly recognizing this, is that it's becoming the risk-free return, which doesn't pay a yield per se, but it does improve in purchasing power. And then I think there's still room for equities on top of that. But again, only select equities that can really prove that they're improved Bitcoin per share. So I think that's probably the way things are going. And as Bitcoin gets bigger, more stable, less volatile, and lower return as measured in fiat, more things will make it over that hurdle rate, hopefully. So I think that's probably this transition we're kind of moving to. And right now it's kind of for the companies that are able to generate Bitcoin per share through this kind of financial engineering magic. Maybe magic's not the right word, but through engineering, I get the sense it's a bit of a land grab right now, a little bit of a gold rush. They're kind of moving into the different capital markets across the world and trying to kind of accumulate as much of that capital as possible. I guess my question for you is, do you kind of see things a similar way in terms of where the market's at right now with this kind of like land grab, gold rush analogy? And if so, how do you see it sort of playing out, over the next 5 to 10 years? What does the kind of end state look like? Will there be winners and losers? How many companies will kind of be here? And then also, do you have some ideas on what these companies will do with the Bitcoin once they've amassed significant amounts of it? So lots of questions, but maybe you can go on.
Yeah, I'll see if I can remember them all and kind of answer it. But it is a train of thought, so it makes sense. I love the questions. And again, it's very hard to foresee the future, but I have an opinion of what I think will happen, of course. You could definitely say that there's a bit of a gold rush now. There's a bit of a land grab for the reason that this is the by far most value producing stock increasing investment opportunity in the world by far, in my opinion, which means right now where there is many countries where there is not a back yet, which there will be sooner or later. So there are companies that are growing incredibly fast because there's just the opportunity is so massive and there's not many doing it yet. And by the way, on that side note, probably number one in each country will continue to be number one and just like really be a massive winner. To me, I'm curious to see how many successful backs there can be in a country. I know there's some like Concilium in UK. I think are doing well as well. But who's going to have the fastest growth as investors? You want to put your money where you get the best return. I think. What's going to happen is there's a hyper growth right now, and there probably will be for some time. SWC, as an example, have, I think was it 15 or 16, 1600 Bitcoin, and they will likely go to 100 and more than 100,000 in my opinion. Metaplan is going to go from 16,000 odd Bitcoin to I think more than 500,000. So there's a gold rush and a land grab. The end game is also really interesting. So what this will create is, in my opinion, the by far most valuable companies in each and every market around the world. Strategy, currently the by far number one, probably the number one in the end game. Metaplan is going to be really big, could be a contender for that spot, but probably number two. And one thing I think is, so what they're going to do when they have all these Bitcoin on the balance sheets, and Max 7 is going to be tiny compared to Strategy in the end game, if you ask me, right? And again, we spoke about Bitcoin as the denominator, as the unit of account earlier here in the podcast. If you look at Max 7 measured in Bitcoin, they are crashing. And they have been since 2009, even though they've done great in fiat terms, but that's just a false denominator and unit of account. What will happen in the end game is that these very valuable companies with the by far strongest balance sheets in the local markets and across the globe, they will likely run financial businesses because they have those assets, the most pristine and powerful asset in the world. So there will be probably financial businesses, banks, develop into banks, probably both dealing with consumers and B2B like companies. And I think one point I want to make is when you're looking at the MNAV, I think, so some people think that, well, if Strategy will only ever accumulate 1 million Bitcoin, they'll be worth 1 million Bitcoin. I think that is very wrong. There will always be a premium because Strategy, for instance, let's take that as an example. But now I want to add to that I actually consider they will reach at least 10% of Bitcoin ever, the Bitcoin ever to be officially in circulation. So I think they'll reach at least 2.1 million Bitcoin on their balance sheet. Right now they crossed 600,000. They're 607,000 Bitcoin. So I believe that Strategy will be a strong financial company utilizing the Bitcoin on the balance sheet for all different kinds of purposes to generate a profit. So the evaluation of Strategy will be both the Bitcoin they have on the balance sheet, right? That for sure as minimum is part of the value of the company, but they'll be able to generate a profit from having that Bitcoin, and that will have a premium. So my thinking right now, and this is part of what I'm going to introduce, share my thoughts in that show that I'm kind of working up here, at least right now, where I do the general overview of comparing these different backs. I think an end game pricing of these company, which means an end game MNAV, probably could be around 1.5. I think that's relatively conservative. So I think if Strategy accumulates 2.1 million Bitcoin, I think it's likely that they'll be valued at 3 million Bitcoin because they have the 2.1, right? That's the minimum, but they'll be able to generate a profit from that. So you got to put that on top. I think the market will put that on top. So that's how I see it. Did I answer all the questions you had in your train of thought? Otherwise, just throw it at me. We'll take it.
Yeah, no, I think that was it. It's kind of where do you sort of think the end game's going? And I think I inferred from that there will be dominant players within each capital market, but I guess only a handful, maybe 2 or 3 or 4 per capital market that are really in the game that have really accumulated a significant amount of Bitcoin relative to their capital markets. And then I guess you also answered the question saying there will be some service they can provide that can generate Bitcoin yield for the equity holders by way of using, effectively financial services based on the Bitcoin that they have on the balance sheet in Treasury. That was my understanding.
Yeah. So let me add to that I do think that there'll be at least one very successful in each market Bitcoin accumulating company. Plus, amongst the local winners, because there'll be at least one, they will compete to be the one that attracts the most global investor capital. So they'll also, of all the local winners, there'll be one that really, just sucks in a lot of capital and will be very successfully financially across all of the local winners. And Strategy, obviously, right now it does look like the only contender, but I will give Metaplanet a note of they have a above 0% probability of them being able to get there. Can they continue the incredible BTC yield they have right now? I think they can for a long time. And they have some local advantages in Japan that that strategy don't have in US. For instance, they can sell put options on Bitcoin, which generate a lot of income that they're buying more Bitcoin for. You look at their yield, they have generated this quarter to date, which gives them 3 weeks. In 3 weeks, they've generated 17.4% BTC yield, and strategy has done around 20% for the year. That being said, I think strategy is headed into a glorious period if they get included in S&P 500, which should be a matter of time, and also because they will have a monopoly on their preferred stock. People that say that strategy has a monopoly because they have the most Bitcoin, I think it's faulty, because the definition of a monopoly is really like being the one and only seller of a specific good and service. So what you have on your balance sheet does not make you a monopoly. And that is, I don't necessarily see it as a moat, but the monopoly that strategy does have, I did an episode on this about a month ago or less. The monopoly that strategy does have is that if they 500, which I think that will happen either in September or December or latest next year, that improves a company's credit rating. So they will, as a company with a superior credit rating, with the by far largest pristine collateral on their balance sheet, they will outshine all other backs in terms of the credibility with which they're selling preferred stocks, which is very important because that means that they can command a premium for their preferred stocks, which means they have to pay less money to borrow through Strike, Strive, Stride, and as of last night, Danish time, Stretch, which means that they will have a monopoly, I think, for the foreseeable future as an S&P 500 extremely creditworthy issuer of preferred stocks. Further to that, I want to add that I think there'll be more than one successful back in each market. I think there can be many, but in terms of where I put my investor money, I kind of like this safer bet of being with number one until there's somewhere in the world there's a number two that has shown they can actually really over time outperform and overtake a number one. I think we already have like 20 backs listed in US. Granted, they're kind of all stalled on the yield, but I do think that we can see a ton of also successful backs in general doing financial services based on their Bitcoin balance sheet in the future.
Got it. Yeah, no, that's really a robust answer there. And I think it's, lots of stuff to kind of respond to from my side. But I think one is, I think we don't have to answer this. It's more rhetorical, but I do wonder, if Bitcoin becomes the unit of account in which stock prices are quoted, it will be interesting to see, how does that MNAV sort of change on that basis? And I haven't really gotten my head around that, but that's an interesting thing to maybe think about. If a company can really generate a yield, how does that kind of manifest itself in the price at which a stock is traded? But that's a whole other ball of wax we probably don't want to get speculate on right now. But
I don't mind, Ted. You have a guest on your podcast that don't have a mind answering like rhetorical questions.
No, let's save that one for another one. After I've had some time to think about it myself.
Okay. All right.
But I wanted to kind of think about, okay, so there's I think when the skeptics looking in on this space right now, they're kind of saying, look, it's a bubble, it's frothy. They can only do this for so long. They kind of see it as being this sort of arbitrage on capital pools that for now can't get access to Bitcoin and therefore use these corporate vehicles to do such. So I think we agree they're missing a lot of elements that kind of help to justify why there's the premium. But for the, let's say, business leaders who are executives at companies in whatever industry they're in, they have operating businesses. They're looking at this space saying, okay, this might be a big speculative bubble. I don't know if I want to tomorrow just sell my operating business and put everything into Bitcoin and start to replicate what Metaplanet is doing. It may make sense for me. It may not make sense for me, but it's just too radical of a shift. For these types of business leaders, do you have any kind of perception on, okay, what is it they could do to adopt Bitcoin that will benefit them, but isn't necessarily going down the exact same path that Metaplanet and others are going? If it really indeed it is the case where it's probably a game where the earlier movers have the advantage, it will be a gold rush, a land grab that will kind of come to an end-ish at some point in time, and in each capital market, there's only kind of room for a few. So if you're one of these business leaders that that's the game I don't think I can win, should I just ignore Bitcoin altogether, or is there something I can do with Bitcoin regardless that maybe takes my company a different path and uses the operating assets I currently have.
Yeah, Ted, we had some great conversations on the harbor front in Copenhagen, in the sun, jumping in the water. I think having a single cold beer and just having that nice, I think what in companies called coffee chat, right? It's a Bitcoin meetup. We're talking Bitcoin, we're talking BACs, and we had great conversation. And I know that what you told me that you're proposing to companies is a first step, which is as minimum use Bitcoin as the hurdle rate. I think if you as a business, feel free to use this in your pitch to companies. If you as a business do not use Bitcoin as the hurdle rate, you will get destroyed in the only denominator, in the only unit of account that matters, and that is Bitcoin. And Bitcoiners have been saying this and thinking this, probably for 15 years. I don't know. Unfortunately, I wasn't there early enough, but So what I sense you're getting at, and also knowing from our conversations, that is something all companies really, unless you want to get destroyed, you need to start thinking about. If you can't outperform Bitcoin with your business decisions, with your investments, if you're getting an 8% or 15% return on your fiat investment measured in fiat, you are getting destroyed in terms of Bitcoin. So use Bitcoin as the investment hurdle rate. You got to outperform that. I think that is a logical first step where you will start making more sound and better investment decisions and management decisions as a company. But also, I do think, so, you mentioned maybe they should give up on trying to accumulate Bitcoin. That doesn't rule out that you at the same time, I think, as much as you can, and 100, 200 companies in each market, if not more, could and should try to accumulate more Bitcoin with financial tools. So maybe you won't have MNAV7 to sell into with a very high premium that generates a fast yield. But, if you can sell into 1.5 MNAV instead of no premium, I mean, why not take advantage of it, right? So, bottom line, I think what you were telling me about is what you are as a consultant going to companies with. I'm happy to pitch your great way of thinking here is like Bitcoin as the hurdle rate. Now let's take it from there.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And I think that will manifest itself in making capital allocation decisions that they would only invest if they can accumulate more Bitcoin, right? And so I think the signal that hopefully companies start understanding is that on the investor side, there's also a growing share of the total capital markets that are realizing the same story, that what they want is Bitcoin. So I think both the investment side and the corporate side are going to kind of grow together. And for corporations that kind of make these forays into a Bitcoin standard type company, they're going to be rewarded by getting capital flowing in from this growing pool of investors that think the way you do, right? So I think that's really, really going to be exciting to see. But I do think it's as Saylor kind of put it, like 99.8% of the global capital hasn't figured this out yet. So we're kind of at the front end of what I expect to be a massive wave of capital transformation. So I think being part of it, being at the front end, like you are as an investor, you stand to benefit from making these right investment decisions. And then I think like a consultancy like Orange Wheel also has the opportunity to kind of establish itself as a leader in this way of thinking for, looking at corporate strategy and old businesses in a new light, new paradigm. I think it's going to be very exciting. I think we're almost out of time here. Maybe Anders, before we sign off, any last thoughts from our discussion? And also, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your analysis and your podcast?
Right. So thank you so much. Well, for the ease of for the ease of use of what to say. So that right there at Anders _ is my profile on X, and from that is where I link to whatever content I produce on YouTube, etc. Otherwise, on YouTube, I am at Two Christians Walk Into a Bar. I also occasionally do produce content for Christians where I am trying to make them understand that it's the only scriptural money to own. You should only be saving in Bitcoin as a Christian. Fiat is actually evil and supports the very core of fiat is non-Christian. Thou shalt not steal. Fiat currency has a built-in policy of stealing through inflation. It's so that those are the two. Then also I will say I am going to speak at BTC Helsinki. I think it's BTC Hell, HEL, one L only, .com. In mid-August, and a discount code Anders, my name there without the underscore, gives people 10% discount. There's going to be, I think it's the first ever Nordic Bitcoin conference, and the speaker lineup is insane. And I'm excited to also get to speak about BACS. I'll do a keynote on one of the stages on BACS, and then I will on main stage have a fireside chat with Sander, Mr. Anderson from H100 that I had on my channel before I went on holiday. CEO of H100, and that'll be super interesting. So, and I hope that I hope you and Johannes and more people from Denmark will make it up. More Bitcoiners from Denmark make it up there.
Yeah, we totally intend to go visit, and we hope to have you back on the podcast sometime in the near future. And look forward to also maybe meeting you here again in Copenhagen around the harbor on a sunny day again. It's been a fantastic chat, Anders. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on, and I would love to be back, Ted.